How can we practically disrupt the cycles of shame and secrecy that often keeps religious trauma as an unspoken experience?
You got to speak about it. The power of shame will get people to stop talking. Just making a choice to say, from this second on, I'm going to reclaim my own power and start to ask these questions that I've had for a really long time.
Many individuals don't even know that they're traumatized, right? That we got plenty of people sitting in mosques and churches across our country, across our world, not knowing that every Sunday they're traumatized. Some people are sitting in churches where women can't lead. That's religious trauma. We're looking at millennials and Gen Zers and even Gen Xers and up who were raised in the church, right? Gen Z is the first generation that's not raised in the church. And so we see for these three older generations living that they are riddled with religious trauma. We literally are living in the after effects of people believing that women cannot lead. It only continues to perpetuate bondage and ways of being that is not conducive for our freedom.
Like, have a discerning eye of how much of this community might actually be caught up in like social hierarchy, right? Or like ego, because I think historically churches also can become places where the root isn't about God and community and service. It's about what positions you hold and what you take that to mean about yourself within the systems.
As a perpetrator of religious trauma, as a pastor that lied to people that trusted me, and a victim of, in some ways, of having things done to me. So my life right now consists of holding these two things. Religious trauma is different than other trauma in that we're attaching it to God. Anytime that happens, things get really beautiful or really complicated.
Welcome to Deeply Well, a soft place to land on your journey. A podcast for those that are curious, creative, and ready to expand in higher consciousness and self-care. This is where we heal. This is where we transcend. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. As always, I'm Devi Brown. Thank you for being here. Today's episode is going to be a little different. We have a special episode planned for today. So this October, some of you may remember that we gathered for the 4th annual Mental Wealth Expo that was created by my dear brother, Charlemagne the God. It's an event that I am so proud to be a part of, and an organization, the Mental Wealth Alliance, that I'm just so proud to be a board member of. So this incredible event has been happening for the last 4 years. We bring thousands of people together, usually from all over the tri-state area specifically, and it is a day full of just really powerful information, opportunity to get connected, treatment, and everything that is expansive to the conversations happening in our homes around mental health, in our communities around mental health and well-being. And so this year was really, might be my favorite. This year I created 2 panels for the Mental Wealth Alliance Expo, and I wanted to investigate some conversations in front of a live audience that we've had the chance to begin investigating here on the podcast Deeply Well. This year, I had the honor of creating these panels, and I'm really grateful to share one of them with you today. And we'll be sharing the second one in the coming weeks. But today's episode is going to be very layered, very deep, an exploration of religious trauma. What it is, how it can shape our sense of self and belonging, and the courageous work that it takes to reclaim agency and trust in ourselves after we may have experienced spiritual harm. So I want to anchor this understanding of religious trauma for just a second. So we've done a previous episode on this podcast called Religious Trauma, which I highly suggest that you go listen to. But this is a really kind of broad and layer phrase to give a definition, give a description to an experience where, and this can happen in a multitude of ways, but in an experience where religion or family belief community belief was weaponized against you and could have dramatically impaired your relationship with yourself, your relationship with God, and your relationship with the greater world around you. Sometimes that can look like things that we've heard of in the news for many decades. Certain things that the Catholic Church has faced. So that can include sexual assault, molestation, rape, by a clergy member, by a member of the church, by an adult against a child, by an adult against another adult, but wrapped within religious context or an unspoken kind of authority that is rooted in religion and in belief. It can also mean someone perpetrating manipulation, manipulative harm against you, dominating you, getting you to do a multitude of things, but usually not related to God and for the betterment of whoever was in a position of power at the time. Even the way that I'm speaking to this now, I want you to know that these are not the only things that fall under the context of religious trauma. I know I've heard from other people throughout my adult life who have been in either very constricting religions. I've had some friends that would recognize being in JW as an experience that they perceived as religious trauma, that they experienced as religious trauma. Also situations where people might have found themselves in cults, either by their own choice or because they were raised into it because of the choices of their caregivers. But again, it's about any kind of restriction, dominance, abuse of any kind, manipulation of any kind that you experienced at the hands of someone in a religious context. It can also be, dogma, indoctrination of beliefs that only serve one person or a certain grouping of people. But if this term in any way is triggering, it's causing charge in the body, or it's causing a lot of really just new thoughts or curiosity to come forward, I really, really, really hope to give you permission with this episode and this conversation to investigate what that phrase means to you. Spend some time looking it up. I think at a basic level, use ChatGPT, use Google to start looking up a few different ways that term or phrase is positioned. I think it could be very supportive or helpful to consider bringing it up in a therapized environment or with someone that has more experience working with people who have experienced significant trauma. So we're going to dive into this conversation. So this panel that I created, I was joined by two men with really powerful stories and powerful lives and experiences. So on this panel, I was joined by Dr. Teddy Reeves and Carl Lentz. In this conversation, we hold space for both the personal and historical dimensions of this topic and reflect on what healing, accountability, and spiritual renewal can really look like in our lives and our communities, especially as we begin to reclaim God for ourselves and reclaim our bodies and reclaim our minds. So our first guest that I named, Dr. Teddy Reeves, PhD, is the Senior Curator of Religion at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. He's the creator of God Talk, a documentary exploring how Black millennials reimagine faith across traditions. You may have heard me speak about this film, God Talk. Over the years, I filmed for this project. Teddy asked me to be a part of it It was 2018. It was a few weeks after I had my son. And I always preface that because, good Lord, was I in the thick of postpartum life as I filmed for this series. So I remember I even had like Quest kind of like across from me as a newborn because I was feeding him and I was shooting. But it was something that was really special. And at that time that this was put together, he had a series of talks that were going across the country where we were bringing to life this idea of understanding what religious trauma is, but also what are the various ways that you can know God for yourself, that people have been fortifying themselves in their faith in their lives and their belief with and their healing with. And also investigating in this doc, the real difference that happened with the millennial generation. There was for a time a mass exodus from the church, from this generation. And that is talked about quite a bit, a lot of different reasonings and personal perspectives that were shared across belief systems through the culture. And it was just a really incredibly done film that I feel very honored to be a part of. But Teddy explores this in such a huge way in his role and in all the work he does around the country on this topic. And our second guest on this conversation was Carl Lentz. Carl Lentz, many might be familiar, was a renowned pastor. He is currently a strategist at Transformation Church and the host of the Lights On podcast. Once a high-profile pastor, Carl has since embraced sobriety and a path of public healing. He now supports others through coaching, helping to destigmatize addiction, infidelity, and challenges with mental health. This conversation was really special and powerful. And for me, as the facilitator of this convo, my eyes are always locked into the audience. My heart is always locked into the audience. My senses and my energy are always locked into the audience and what they're feeling and how they're processing. And it was just really powerful for me to watch the expressions, to hear the sighs, to hear even some of the anger, to hear some of the deep reflection that was happening throughout the audience as we were having this conversation. And then to see so many afterwards just form huge lines to speak with Teddy, to speak with Carl, to share with Carl what he meant to them as a pastor and what it meant to them to hear him now speaking from his space of healing. So it's an honor to share this conversation with you. We talk about the duality of sacred spaces, how they can offer profound comfort and connection, yet also be sites for shame, for silence, for ego, for control. And together we really examine how religious trauma can impact identity and self-worth, the stifling of women's leadership that can happen within the church, and the subtle ways that shame and hierarchy shape our relationship with God and with ourselves, sometimes forever. The conversation invites us to release limiting beliefs, dismantle shame, and rediscover the divine beyond institutions, to rebuild a relationship with spirit that feels true, expansive, and grounded in autonomy, curiosity, and compassion. And it's an offering to anyone healing from spiritual wounds, honoring where you're called and choosing a faith that allows you to flourish. At the end of our time together, Dr. Reeves and Carl leave us with powerful reflections and practices that can support you on your journey. So without further ado, here's our conversation on religious trauma. Hello, everyone. How are you feeling? Yeah. What an amazing and important way to spend a Saturday afternoon. My name is Devi Brown. I'm a wellness educator and a healer and also a proud board member of the Mental Wealth Alliance. So we are so excited to be here for year 4. Thank you. We're going to have a very deep panel. And to get us ready and before I introduce my guests, let's have a centering breath together. Is everybody in for that? Yeah? So go ahead and get comfortable. Like really comfortable, like uncross a couple things, sit forward, let your spine be straight and your belly be soft. And we're just gonna take 3 deep breaths in to really lock us into the present moment and anything that may arise. So I wanna invite you, if you can hear the sound of my voice and you're seated and comfortable, to gently close your eyes. And we will begin a nice deep inhale in through your nose, filling your belly, rising in the chest, and exhale. Deep inhale in through the nose, And last breath here together. Deep inhale in through your nose. Really let it stretch your belly and your chest. And beautiful. Thank you for settling into this space with me. You can gently open your eyes as you're ready. So again, welcome everyone today. We're getting ready to enter into a very deep and nuanced conversation about religious trauma, what it means, how it shapes our sense of self, our sense of belonging, our connection to faith in God, and how we can begin the work of reclaiming agency after harm, if that was present in your life. We are just blessed to have these two men on stage, absolute acclaimed stage today. I want to start by introducing the first incredible voice, Dr. Teddy Reeves, who is the Senior Curator of Religion at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. He's the creator of a really phenomenal documentary called God Talk, exploring how Black millennials reimagine faith across traditions. And I was very honored to be featured in that film. Welcome, Teddy. Thank you.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And next, we have Carl Lentz, strategist at Transformation Church and host of the Lights On podcast. Once a high-profile pastor, Carl has since embraced sobriety and a public path of healing. He now supports others through coaching, helping destigmatize addiction, infidelity, and challenges with mental health. Thank you so much for being here, Carl.
Honored. Thank you.
I think to really get this conversation grounded, before we start, religious spaces kind of historically can be both sacred places of healing and sources of profound harm. Religious trauma impacts identity, self-worth, and the ability to connect with the community and with your own relationship with a higher power. Healing in this space requires so much courage, safe spaces, humility, and new ways of belonging. So I think to kick off this conversation, and I'll start with you, Teddy, what is your definition of religious trauma? How do you even relate to that word, that concept?
Thanks so much, Devi, for the question, and I'm really excited to be here. I think to define religious trauma, I first ask the question of what is religion for that person? Right? That religion means something different for each one of us, depending on the tradition we came out of, depending on the experiences we had. But I will say, as someone who grew up in the South, in a Black Baptist church, I would say my religious trauma came from the experiences of people in my Black Baptist church. Right? And so I think religious trauma is the vestiges of something deeper, particularly for people of African descent. It's the remnants of something that we have continuously been dealing with since our arrival on these shores, right? That religious trauma is not something that happened in the 90s only, in the 2000s only. Religious trauma started in 1865 once we set our foot on these shores, right? It was 1865 when we're free from these shores, but when we get here in 1790, right, it begins at these points. So religious trauma is anything that has caused you, called soul wounds, that's called mental wounds in you and around you at the hands of your religious institution or those who are leading it. But I think also religious trauma is something we experience at home. Right, that it isn't always at the hands of the religious leader or leaders, but it is something that happens when the text, when tradition, when doctrine is used to justify behavior or justify discipline or justify mistreatment of individuals. That become the remnants of religious trauma. I just always like to center it, particularly for people of African descent, that religious trauma didn't start in our hands. We inherited it, and we've been passing it and perpetuating it since then.
Wow, thank you. Carl, how do you relate to that word?
Well, I'd just like to say, firstly, your outfit's incredible. And how's everybody doing? You guys good? It's good to see you. I think I see this angle from this situation from two angles as a perpetrator of religious trauma as a pastor that lied to people that trusted me, and a victim of, in some ways, of having things done to me. So my life right now consists of holding these two things with a beautiful tension, because religious trauma is different than other trauma in that we're attaching it to God. And anytime that happens, things get really beautiful or really complicated. And so I enjoy seeing people get free of that fear that often accompanies this kind of religious trauma. And there is a brighter day for people who are willing to dig for it.
Ooh, wow. I just want to say thank you. I'm going to say this to you all day, but just like thank you for the courage and the humility of being here and speaking to this in that way, like the power of what you and your unique viewpoint can bring to the world. It's really profound. I'll start with you on this first question, Carl. You know, how can we practically disrupt the cycles of shame and secrecy that often keeps religious trauma as an unspoken experience?
You got to speak about it. I mean, I love when people get the courage to actually get it out, because the power of shame will get people to stop talking. And the longer you do that, the more that pain will continue to work through your whole body. And so it seems like it's a long road to heal from religious trauma, and it can be. But the first step is just getting with somebody that you trust to get it out. And say, this is how I feel. Because the first thing you lose with religious trauma is agency. You have outsourced your conviction, your power. You have to go to someone else to get something else. And the first step to reclaiming that is saying, wait, I have a voice. I feel, I see, I sense. And learning how to trust that again, it's a beautiful journey. But that's where it begins. It's just making a choice to say, from this second on, I'm going to reclaim my own power and start to ask these questions that I've had for a really long time. And so I love pointing people right to that one moment of just sitting with somebody you love and saying, this is what happened to me. And even if that's all you did, it's enough to start this journey of healing that never ends until we're going to be in heaven.
Never ends. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Teddy.
I think to that point, Carl, I think a big part of it for me is that many individuals don't even know that they're traumatized. Right? That we got plenty of people sitting in mosques and churches across our country, across our world, not knowing that every Sunday they're traumatized. Right? That every Sunday they're walking around with psychological trauma in their body and not knowing it. Right? That someone is willing to parse out their identity, their way of being, their existence. Right? Example of some people are sitting in churches where women can't lead, based off a Pauline text that was poorly interpreted when Paul says that women should be silent, when Paul was specifically talking to the church at Corinth because the women were being loud in the Colosseum. And he was like, look, y'all can't talk when I come around, to mean that women can't lead in leadership roles, right? That's religious trauma, right? That we have plenty, and our churches are full of women, particularly black women, that are sitting in these spaces not knowing that the stifling of leadership starts early, right? And it often starts at the hands of black churches and black religious spaces. And so I think that particularly for when we're looking at millennials and Gen Zers and even Gen Xers and up who were raised in the church, right? Gen Z is the first generation that's not raised in the church, not raised in a religious institution overwhelmingly. And so we see for these three older generations living that they are riddled with religious trauma. Right? That we literally are living in the after effects of people believing that women cannot lead, right? And that black women cannot lead. And so really believing that, we got folks who are walking around believing their sexual identities is up for debate because of a text. When we can't even read a liberatory text, when the story of Jonathan and David is a story not of platonic friendship. Right? But we're not talking about the hermeneutics and the theological conversations and questions and readings that need to be done in the text. And so I think part of this is that a lot of people are walking around not knowing they're traumatized. Right? And that becomes the story of also a group of people who walk around consistently traumatized from injustice, from hate, from all of these things. And so when you compound religiosity to it, we are a spiritual people. it only continues to perpetuate bondage and shackles and ways of being that is not conducive for our freedom. And so I think that that is also something we need to sit with.
I was going to say, do you find that when you talk to people and you want to know whether they know they're traumatized or not, I like to say, what do you think God's posture is? If you were going to have a conversation with the God that you claim to believe in, what is his posture towards you? And right away you can find out, because most people would think he's judgy, he's mean, he's mad. What would be the posture of God? And that's when you find out quickly, wow, how long you been living like that? Is that heavy to walk around every day thinking that God is looking at you like this? What if there's a different truth to find?
And who would want to serve a God like that?
Apparently a lot of people in white evangelical circles.
That is true, brother. That is true.
Because then we get into the fibers of the way that we connect God even to the trauma we experience in our homes and in the world and in systemic oppression, and why we are seeking out to serve punishment in the first place.
And why do we give God human problems?
Okay.
God didn't do that to you. The church, that person did that, right? That we are all broken beings, but name the thing, right? The text tells us to name the demon, right? Jesus asked the demon the name for a specific reason, because he's saying, what is this thing that I need to uproot? I need to name the person that harmed me so that we can uproot and begin to find out, are we going to reconcile or are we not going to reconcile, right? But if we're unwilling to name it, but we put it on God, right? I'm like, God ain't hurt you. These people hurt you, right? And the God in them is what we can be reconciled. We can decide whether we want to be reconciled back to one another through it. But I think that when we talk about church decline and all these other things, it's often because people put the hurt on God, right? And to your point, versus putting the hurt and the blame where it needs to sit and us walking through that.
Yeah. Ooh. It's funny when you... When you say giving God human problems, like the first thing that came to me is like, yeah, if you're looking at God as being this punishing, this judging, so we're saying God doesn't have tools, that like God isn't emotionally regulated, have the ability to see past personal feelings of, irritation and indignation.
Yeah, no, I was going to say it's a lot of people God's voice sounds a lot like their dad, that was or was not there, that was good or was not good. And that's a really interesting thing to look at, because that's the tape people play. God's voice is the dad that you either hated or didn't have, maybe you loved him, but that's not necessarily reflective of the God that we know. And that's a very tricky thing for people to start to unwind, but it's worth it, because you might have been listening to the wrong tape your whole life. What impact might that have had? And that's the thing about trauma. If you have relationship trauma, beautiful relationships are the carnage. If you have church trauma, your relationship with God can be the carnage, and that's not fair. We're owed better than that,
I think from a very practical sense, what I often offer people to that point is one of the first things to do in kind of freeing yourself from that is to free yourself from the language that God has to only be your father, right? I refer to God as she, right? You can put she in the text sometimes. When it says he, we did that, right? That's an interpretation. But that if you're referring to God and you give God back God's autonomy, because God is not a man nor a woman, when you give God back God's autonomy, or saying God is a good God, right? Removing the pronouns allow you to remove the harm that was done to you by those personal individuals and give God back God's autonomy, right? That I will say Mother God quickly, right? Because if you have a poor relationship with your father, and God is your father, then you and God, that's why you don't pray like that, right? Because you don't know how to talk to your daddy. So like really having this freeing moment to say, no, like God is autonomous of us. We are God's hands and feet in the world, but God is autonomous from me as a being. And so God is God. God is spirit. God is this thing that's beyond me, but is in me and around me. And so I don't have to give God, again, human problems, right? That they hurt me, but God loves me. Right. And so if I sit in that I am beautifully and wonderfully made, right, that I don't enter my relationship with God in sin. I enter my relationship with God in love. right? And when I enter with love, everything else works itself out, right? But when you enter from a sinful point, you look at God as this, oh, God is going to turn God's back on me, or I'm not good enough from God. I'm beautifully and wonderfully made. That's what the text said, right? And it said that when he or she created me, I was good creation, period, right? Everything else will work itself out. That is my humanity working right now. But I'm good, right? That if I hurt my brother here, I'm still good. The text gives me how to reconcile with him. But God still loves me, period, right? And I think that freedom also helps us release ourselves from that trauma.
That is so good. Yeah. Oof. I'm looking at this clock and I'm like, they better put 60 more minutes up here because I have all the questions we need to hear today. I think next, and I know this is, Carl, I'll start with you here on this next question. You know, for those that have decided because of often unspoken harm that has happened, who've decided to step away from religion entirely, what are some ways to reconnect with spirituality or meaning outside of traditional frameworks? How do you build that walk, live in that walk, if you have stepped away from your family's church or just, all of it as a system?
I think religious institutions, whether it's a church or whatever we're going to call an institution, it's only as powerful as the door that you entered it from. So we always try to tell people the ideal is to have a relationship with God outside of that institution. From there, if you enter a church or a place, it's a different succession of connection. If your only connection to God is through an institution, what happens when the institution goes bad, or the pastor lies, or the pastor lets you down? All of a sudden it all falls down. But if you enter this, whatever your faith leads you towards, if you have a relationship with God that supersedes that, which it should, there's a lot more strength. So I always encourage people, I'm not interested in what box you check or what you call yourself on Facebook, Christian, Catholic. Like, what is your relationship with the living God? How do you define that? From there flows everything. And most people, if you ask them about God, the first thing they do is talk about their church. And there's a little bit of beauty to that, but there's a whole lot of problems with that too. So I just like to tell people you have a lot of time. Take your time. There's no rush. God is patient. And it's better to go slow and be right than it is to rush back in and be wrong again. And often people, when they're traumatized, they just take the first option there, and sometimes you get back in the same cycle. So I just like to point people to, church is something that is important. We've made it. It can be beautiful. But the design is to always have a relationship with God that is unattached from that. And if you have that, typically you're going to want to build a community. You're going to want to be in community with people that believe the same thing. But if I have my relationship with God correctly, humans can let me down, and it will not knock my view of this God that I believe saved my life. And there's something you can stand on when that happens. I'm hurt and I'm disappointed and I'm sad that this person or this church let me down, but it has not changed my standing with the God that created me. There's power in that.
Wow. Oh, that is so good. That is so good. And I think even in that, and I wish we had the time to get into it, but for me, that also brings up that when you are kind of looking at your church, if you did come from a place that felt harmful or just not the most aligned fit to you being in presence with God, like, have a discerning eye of how much of this community might actually be caught up in like social hierarchy, right? Or like ego, because I think historically churches also can become places where the root isn't about God and community and service. It's about what positions you hold and what you take that to mean about yourself within the systems.
I also, to add to both of you, I think we also get to nuance this language around reconnecting, right? Because what I tell people, if you left your church, you're still with God outside in the club, period. Right? It doesn't require you come back into something. to be reconnected with the divine, right? That I think when we're looking at data just alone, millennials and Gen Z are overwhelmingly identifying as nones, N-O-N-E, right? That we are nor are we Christian, are we Buddhist, we are living in this very pluralistic space in our faith, right? We are Christian, but we get our tarot cards read. We're Christian and we do crystals. We're Christian and we meditate. Like, we are living in this very spiritually fluid space. And so I think part of what this is when we're dealing with this religious trauma and many folks have walked out of the space, it's to cultivate the space you've walked into, right? If the space is podcasting, stay in the podcasting lane, right? God is with you there. It's a ministry, right? If your space is at the music festival, right? I think if your space is here at the Mental Wealth Expo, this is a space where we're having church, right? We're talking about the divine. You can eat, you can break bread, you can fellowship. We can even sing a song and leave, right? That we have done the work of the church. And so I think it's honoring your call, honoring where Spirit has called you in this season. If it's outside of the church in which you were raised, flourish. Right? Flourish there, experience the divine there. This is what's happening today. This is where Spirit is moving today. And I always want to say we're not doing anything new. We're reclaiming old practices, right? That our ancestors, when we got here, overwhelmingly, majority of us were Muslim. We practice traditional African religion. If you are a descendant of chattel slavery in this country, your people were not Christian. Christianity was happening in the north. It was in Ethiopia. Or unless you're Ethiopian, that is where that was happening for us. And so what we're seeing today with millennials is us reclaiming free thought, right? We're walking in line of Zora Neale Hurston. We're walking in the line of James Baldwin. We're walking in the line of Frederick Douglass. These folks who understood that their relationship with the divine was not regulated to a church, right? But that the church becomes one extension of what Black folks were able to create, particularly for us in this country, to resist injustice, right? To fight against oppression. And it's a beautiful space that we should keep cultivating. But not all of us are called to be in that space. And so honoring where you are called, honoring where Spirit is leading you, and healing your trauma there, right? That sometimes the hand, as Dr. Thema Bryant would say, the hand that harmed you can't be the hand that healed you, right? And so you got to go get healed. And if you want to reconnect, make sure that you are healed before you go back to the space that harmed you. And honor where you are and where Spirit may have you. If that's the club, if that's Twitch, if it's YouTube, wherever that is, wherever your ministry has called you to commune with the divine or conjure with the divine, honor that.
Thank you. I think as our final question on this stage, I'm going to make it a two-part because I got to get an extra question off because this time went too fast. I would say for each of you, how can communities of faith begin to repair trust with people who have been harmed? And for anyone in the audience listening right now that is quietly struggling with their own story and experiences, how would you encourage them to take a first step towards reclaiming agency? So little two-parter, rebuilding as a faith community and internal building as an individual.
I mean, I'll go 15 seconds, you go 20. It's like,
no, we're
talking about church, so we should just
talk.
disregard the time anyway if we're talking church. No, I think I point people to truth. It's worth digging for truth. I'm a Jesus follower, so if you know your Bible in here, and the Bible talks about putting on the armor of God, it likens truth to a belt. Because if you have everything but you don't have a belt, everything falls down, and you are now immobilized. You have the best outfit in the world on, but if your pants fall down, you're not going anywhere. And in the church world, you see a lot of people who have the fancy stuff. They got the sword, they got the helmet, but they don't know the truth. And they can't figure out why it never seems to fit right. And I like pointing people to a mirror first. How do I feel right now? What's in my body? What's in my soul? What do I think has happened to me? And then you grab a telescope and think, what would a life of freedom look like rather than fear? And then you get a magnifying glass and go, what's one step I can do today? And that little succession, before you know it, you're on this walk and you're like, how did I get so free? Because you don't get free in a day, it's a journey. So I like looking at it like that, like what's true for me? What do I believe is true? Don't judge it, just stand on it. And from there, You know, every day is a new step to find some deeper truth. But there's a better day than just sitting where you've been hurt. It's just a tragedy to me when people allow the horrible actions of others to rob them of a relationship with the living God. There's a better opportunity.
Thank you.
I would argue for institutions, when I'm talking to clergy, whether they're Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, the question is always, how do we get young people? How do we get young people? You're not going to get us, right? Like, we gone, right? But it's not as, and it's the data shows us, millennials and Gen Zers are not walking away from God, they're walking away from church. And to your point, Carl, earlier, if we can begin to do the work to see them as not mutually exclusive, right? That it is the job of religious institutions to name the harm, right? That you have, our institutions and the people within them have to do the hard work to reconcile. How are we causing harm? How have we caused harm? How do we support the work of what young people are creating in the world today to experience the divine? If they at the club, create something for them to go to the club, right? If they like to do, I used to be a pastor many moons ago, and I remember having a young adult party, and I was the executive pastor, and the senior pastor was like, we having a party? I said, absolutely, we having a party. Why not? I was like, and we having drinks. Why not? Because they're going to drink when they leave here. Why they might as well drink when they're here, right? But we can talk about responsible drinking. We can talk about what it means to be the church. We can talk about the first miracle being wine. You think Jesus didn't drink it? Right? Like, we can talk about what does it mean to practically live this thing out, right? But it takes us to have these hard conversations. It takes us meeting these generations where they are. It doesn't take us compromising the story that Jesus lived, Jesus was born, and Jesus died, and on the third day Jesus got up. What it takes us is to really acknowledge that Jesus lived in a world in which is not similar to the world we live in today, but also is not much different than the world we lived in today. There were the same folks, same demons, same everything going on. They just didn't have the same technologies we had. And so really looking at that and having those hard truths. I think if I'm talking to an individual or anyone here that is in this point in their journey, I would say very practically, if you journal, if you audio record yourself, whatever that is, I would encourage you to write a list. Everything the church or your religious institution told you was wrong about you, right? I'm not this because I do that. I am not this because I do that. Write it down. Don't hold it back. Just write it all on a list, vocalize it. And then begin to write on the other column everything you believe about yourself, right? I'm powerful. I'm loving. I am this. I am that. Look at the thing you were taught to believe that you were not because you didn't follow this, but everything you believe about yourself, right? If the list of things that you were told were not good about you outweighs the things you believe about yourself, you're in religious trauma, right? Name the demon and begin to work through that list, right? If you are like, I'm not this because of this, I encourage you to go get a commentary and begin to read the text for yourself, to realize this text was written for a specific demographic of people at a specific time for a specific reason, right? I'll free you one better. If you're still reading the King James Version, let the King James Version go, right? That brother was not that there's anything wrong with it, but if we're going to name the demon, right, because your list is on the left side, that brother was a drunk who was making money, so he converted the Bible into English to sell it. It's not even the closest you're going to get to the original text. The NRSV or the NIV is the closest you're going to get to the original Greek and Hebrew. So if you're talking about really working through religious trauma, it comes from a very practical level of how are you reading the text? What is your hermeneutic of seeing yourself in the text? Connect yourself to amazing theologians doing work around the things on your list, right? If you feel like you're a black woman and you can't lead, there's theologians like Candace Bimbo, Melva Sampson, all of these women who are doing work around, no, we actually are worthy. If you believe it's because of your sexual orientation, there are theologians that can walk you through that. There is work and love and purpose and honor in the divine for you. And so do that work to begin to unravel and heal yourself. The text says, servant, heal thyself. right? Know thyself and heal thyself, right? Because if God lives in you, then the healing and everything you need, we profess Holy Spirit, right? Even if you're not even Christian, the Spirit, we believe that there's something. That thing is on the inside of you. If you begin to do the work and begin to change the outside of you too, right? And so give yourself over to that work.
D, I'll say this. I give you, beautiful, brother. I think just as a handle, if you wanted an idea, if you're in this space and you're searching, one of the most beautiful prayers you can pray, because the Bible points to the renewing of your mind being the real conduit for transformation, not your actions. So if you just say, God, help me renew my mind, if there is a God and he does hear us and we believe that he does, he will do that. It doesn't. When was the last time you thought again? When was the last time you renewed your mind? And the Bible points to this picture of us having the ability to shake it off and say, let me think again. Let me see clearly. And God will answer that prayer. So it's just if you find yourself lonely today and you leave here and you're thinking, I don't know what to pray, Lord, help me renew my mind, is something you'll never be sorry you ever said to heaven.
Wow, I do not want to get off this stage.
You got to take up an offering now, so if you could just look under your seat for an envelope.
I would make the joke and say
Get
lock
the
the
bulls
doors,
going.
but
I just want to say to you both first, I have such a deep admiration for each of you and how you are carrying yourselves in the world and what you are doing with your lived experience to stay deeply connected with God, to serve, but to also bring people to God and to bring people to whatever healing they deserve to have happen within themselves. Thank you both so much. Your honesty, your wisdom, the courage to bring all of this into this space. I think religious trauma is very deeply personal. It's collective, and what we have heard here is that it requires our own internal investigation, supercharged discernment, accountability and self-compassion and compassion for all, ultimately. So as we close, I really want to remind everyone in the audience right now who's listening, who may be navigating this quietly, internally, whether it's your experience, your children, your parents, however it presents, you are absolutely, as you've learned now more than ever, not alone in this process. And I want you to know that to a certain degree, like if you grappled with this in earlier stages of your life and decided not to go back to try to figure that out, life is changing. The world is rapidly evolving and changing, and resources, people, communities, just the language to understand what you may have walked through in your life is now more readily available than it has ever been in human history, in the history of humanity. We are, really coming to such a precipice with how we experience God, but also how we experience ourselves with our mental health and our physical health. So there are more answers than ever. Please start looking for them. Even really refined Google searches could be a great start to lead you somewhere. Looking up this term, walking in rooms with this term. Recently, Teddy, I didn't have a chance to share this story with you, but I'm based in LA, and I was meeting a friend for a studio session, and we were having a talk about your film outside, and I opened the door, and I'm not going to say who it is, but the room was filled with incredible musicians that we know and love. I opened the door, and the last thing I said as I walked in, I go, well, yeah, because that's religious trauma. Them hearing me say that word, the whole room went silent. And they're like, can you say that again? And I go, religious trauma. And you just saw all these light bulbs go off in people because they didn't have that framework of language. And that turned into hours and hours of conversation about this. And I know, each one in the world on their own search. But I say all that to say again, there are more resources than ever. There are more ways to really understand what your lived experience might have been, but also where you can go from here, and how you can continue to build faith in your heart and in your life and connect to a higher power. So grateful for everybody in this room. Thank you for being here today. I'm Devi Brown. Teddy, would you mind sharing that?
yes, I will be at the book table at 1 o'clock. The first 100 people that join us there, the museum will be giving you a free book. It's our double exposure book. It looks at African American religion through various traditions, Buddhism, Christianity, Santeria, Voodoo, through photography. And so I encourage the first 100 people, it's a free book on behalf of the National Museum of African American History and Culture.
Thank you so much for making this possible for us. Dr. Teddy Reeves, Carl Lentz, thank you so much. Wow. Thank you, everyone, for opening your hearts to this conversation. It can be a very triggering one for a lot of reasons. And for many, it might be the very first time that you are hearing of this particular experience, what religious trauma is. So I just send a lot of love to you on holding your curiosity for this and investigating where it may land in your life, or where you may have recognized it landing in the life of someone you love or someone you know. If you're navigating your own journey with religious trauma, reclaiming your spiritual identity, or learning to trust yourself again, I really want to remind you right now, you're not alone in this. This affects millions of people. And there is nothing wrong or broken about you. Your questions, your pain, and your longing for deeper connection are sacred and they're valid. We're living in a time where language, resources, and community are expanding. Spaces for healing are growing, and there are more paths than ever to explore your faith, your spirit, and your truth gently, at your own pace, and in a way that honors your wholeness and your unique path. As you move forward, I hope that you continue building trust in your own inner knowing. And may you remember that your connection to God, to spirit, to the divine, it belongs to you and you alone. It cannot be taken, it cannot be defined for you, and it can only be lived from within. Take your time, seek support when you need it, and hold yourself with compassion as you unlearn, unbuild, and rise. Thank you so much to Dr. Teddy Reeves, to Carl Lentz for the courage, for the shepherding that was really felt and received by this conversation. And I'm looking forward to having many more. I know after we got off the stage from having this conversation, the three of us kind of huddled together and we were like, we got to hit the road with this. You know, it just, I'm excited to continue to expand in this conversation, and especially with those two gentlemen. So please share your thoughts. And really the only soul work for today's episode is give yourself the space, the time, and the softness to explore where this episode is landing within your body and start to ask why and how and what you want to investigate about it moving forward. Thank you for joining us on this episode. We'll be back next week. Please share this episode with any friend you think could use it. Share it on Threads, share it on IG, on Stories. If you're on X, share it on X, Substack, wherever the people are gathering. And thank you. Namaste.